Good morning, friends from the media. Welcome to today's 11 o'clock press conference on COVID. Apart from the Chief Executive, we also have the Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Both of them will have an opening remarks to make before answering questions. Because of the epidemic, I'd like to remind you all to keep your masks on and stay socially distanced. We'll first hear from the Chief Executive. Good morning, everyone. At the beginning of this month, we have drawn reference from the views of mainland experts. We have put our anti-epidemic fight on a certain area, that is, the reduction of cases in 3 areas, 3 focal areas, as well as a priority, that is, to reduce serious cases, fatalities, and number of infections. We will put focus on 3 major institutions and organizations and accord priority to a certain group of people. All these are done to protect our elderly citizens, to avoid them getting infected or even worse, becoming a serious case or a death case. I have already spoken to you in details in relation to this with the Chief Executive of the Hospital Authority and the Secretary for Food and Health. Well, of those who have been hospitalized, that is 10,000 of them, over 85% of them are above the age of 60. The Hospital Authority, the HA, has done a lot of work. That is, they have designated hospitals to treat COVID patients. They have converted and increased the number of COVID beds. They have introduced a triage as well as a tiered or leveled treatment and the introduction of new oral medication. Today I'm here with the Secretary for Labour and Welfare to talk to you about how we can achieve our work in terms of reductions, focal areas, as well as priority with the Secretary. As of yesterday, we have 3,685 cases that are from care homes. They are care homes for the elderly and those are for the disabled. There are 77,000 people staying at these places. The death cases is about 5%, which is quite high. So we have to not just deal with the situation we have on hand, we also have to be prepared for better protection of priority groups as well as care homes for the elderly, which is a focal area. Of course, I have to talk about vaccination. For care homes, the first dose is about 56% in terms of vaccination. 40% of the residents have been infected. That's why they are not yet vaccinated. Our outreach team will go to these 1,100 care homes for recovered patients in the elderly group to vaccinate them. For those who have received their first dose, they will receive their second dose. However, in the community, there is still room for vaccination rate for those who are above the age of 80 to be enhanced. At the moment, for those above the age of 60, 57% of them have received only 1 dose, and only 40% of them have received 2 doses. So our work has to continue. Let me give you the heads up. Tomorrow, I will, together with the Secretary for Civil Service, who is in charge of the vaccination program, to speak to you tomorrow about how we can further enhance a vaccination rate, especially in the elderly group and the younger group. I myself, with Professor Law, are also responsible of unemployment support. Last week, we have announced 2 programs, that is the temporary unemployment relief as well as the Employment Support Scheme 2022. We'll be happy to answer questions. We'll first hear from Professor Law in relation to our work to support care homes for the elderly. Thank you. As you all know, that the 5th wave came suddenly and quite violently. Within a very short time, we have seen the virus spreading quickly in care homes for the elderly. According to CHP data, on the 6th of March, the peak for care homes for the elderly. On a single day, 73 care homes have seen cases. In terms of accumulated cases over 14 days, on the 7th of March, we have seen 14,000 residents being infected. With such a large number of residents being affected, we fully understand the plight faced by care homes for the elderly as well as the pressure faced by the hospital. Luckily, the figure has been decreasing since. On the 25th of March yesterday, for the number of cases in care homes over 14 days, that has dropped to 971 residents. Our priority work in care homes is vaccination. It's already been covered by the Chief Executive. Tomorrow, the Secretary for Civil Service will also give you more information. 2 weeks ago, in the same place, I have shared with you another key area of our work, which is manpower. I pointed out that the SWD, the Social Welfare Department, plan to directly recruit care staff from Hong Kong and from the mainland. I said that this is a novel approach because there is no such category of staff within the department. So it's the first time ever that the department itself directly recruit this kind of staff. At the beginning of this month, we have recruited short-term contracts. So far, 630 of them have arrived in Hong Kong. Upon arrival, they will receive a training course over 3 days. They will learn how to take care of frail elderly people. They then will be sent to holding centers to start their work. The 600 or so team have already arrived at the different holding centers. And in tandem, we will recruit contract staff for 3 months locally. We have received 550 applications, and we have started interviews by faces. Some of the applicants, upon learning about the details of their obligations, their interests have dampened. For the first batch, 42 of them have completed their training courses. They will be assigned to care homes to provide service. These care homes face tremendous pressures, so they need our help to allay their manpower pressure. The other 22 are still being trained. They will start work soon. For the third batch, 40 of them, they will start their training next week. Our work will continue and will be completed soon. On the other hand, in order to address the manpower shortage in care homes, the situation actually is aggravating. By that I mean that they already have a shortage of manpower, but with COVID, it got worse. So we have made relaxations of certain requirements under the labor importation scheme. Those who have joined the scheme would have to first undergo recruitment over 4 weeks locally, and they will have to make applications to consult the Labor Advisory Board. Subvented and private care homes may make an application to import labor. So far, the Labor Department has received 395 applications involving 2,209 care staff members. 312 of them have been approved, involving 1,764 care staff members. Of them, 291 of them are care homes for the elderly. The remaining 21 are care homes for the disabled. The Hong Kong SAR government attaches importance to the fight against COVID amongst COVIDs. Back in 2020, we have set up dedicated facilities at Asia World Expo. The purpose was to send close contact to the quarantine center at the AWE should there be an outbreak. For quite some time there was no outbreak, but still we have maintained our manpower. If you ask the SWD, you would learn that for a few months the utilization rate was 0. However, everything was ready and it would be commissioned when needed. Even though for quite a period of time there was no cases in care homes, we were still prepared. The objective was to react very swiftly and quickly. However, given the rapid emergence of the fifth wave, so the facilities have been changed to elderly confirmed cases for community isolation or holding centers. Currently, those that are run by the SWD, apart from the AWE, we have Shek Kip Mei, Choi Wing Road, Harbour Road, and Tin Shui Wai Sports Center. That is 4 holding centers. In relation to the community isolation center at Kai Tak Terminal, it started commissioning by phases on the 21st of March. There are 1,188 beds. Currently, we have 400 beds operating. For Tsuen Wan West Holding Center, it will be commissioned the day after tomorrow. With more and more these isolation facilities as well as holding centers being commissioned, and with care staff coming from the mainland and local ones that have started working, so we are ready to provide services for care homes. We will also speed up assessments of health conditions of elderly people. Care homes can directly send those with mild symptoms or mild cases to send them to holding centers. We've also streamlined the procedure. The government will help as best as we can to give breathing space to care homes. We are all very concerned about the utilization rate of holding centers. As the chief executive said, we would prefer for beds to be waiting for people instead of the other way around. In the second half of last year, basically most of these beds were vacant. Well, in our support to help care homes and to make good use of resources and manpower, we plan to earmark some of the facilities for close contacts of residents. That is, back to the original approach, like the one I said a minute ago in relation to the Asia World Expo. So, should there be cases in care homes, close contacts may leave the care home and be sent to these facilities. We'll make good use of time. Before the 6th outbreak, we will set up an interdepartmental working group to take stock of the capabilities of care homes to fight the epidemic. The first area of work is to enhance ventilation facilities of care homes and relevant guidelines. We have the FHB, the Department of Health, the Hospital Authority, Development Bureau, as well as the EMSD. The first meeting of the working group will be convened next week. I'll answer questions now.
We're now taking questions, and the reporter, please raise up your hand and please tell us which organization you're representing and speak through the microphone. On the front row, please. News. Good morning, Chief Executive. On the 1st of April, the government will resume public service. Well, with over 10,000 cases per day, by gradually resuming public service, will you actually cause the cases to rebound? Would you have any coping measures? Second question, and Some of the residents arranged to send to Penny Bay by the FSD and was chastised by the Department of Health and cannot quarantine at home, while the infected elderly was urged to leave the hospital by the HA and transferred to SWD to sent to holding center. Seems there's an improvement for the government coordination. How would you improve department's coordination to prevent the scenarios as stated and enhance the efficiency to fight the epidemic? The first question, the Civil Service Bureau issued a circular to the relevant departments that in the fifth wave, now that we have passed the peak and start stabilizing, it's time to resume public services. And of course, it should be adopted in a gradual manner. And while the officers serving the public as well as the civil servants returning to office should have stringent anti-epidemic measures in place, the civil servants will continue to work in shifts and do their lunch hours in a staggered way to reduce crowding. As I stressed many times, in the domain of public health, we put life at the first priority. However, we need to consider the development and economic needs of the society. If we suspend or public services for a long period, it will affect the public and reduce the speed of the economic rebound. In our anti-epidemic work, especially since the fifth wave, that due to the surge in cases, there has some of the coordination and communication work has not been too satisfactory. What the Secretary Law mentioned about shortcomings, we admit there are quite a few shortcomings. Well, this has to do with insufficient capacity to cope with a large number of cases. These shortcomings may appear in departmental communications, as each department's focus is on their own portfolio and we're not able to fully coordinate in order to let the individuals get timely services. As I read from the papers, some isolated cases after infected by entering the isolation facility or after being confirmed, and there are some shortcomings in discharge procedures. We will check up these lessons and we'll try our utmost to improve. Second question. To my right, the gentleman in white.
From the South China Morning Post. So first, local media has reported that the government will substantially relax the so-called place-specific flight suspension mechanism to encourage more inbound flights back to Hong Kong. So Mrs. Lam, can you verify the news? So if so, what is the scale? And my next question is that Bernard Chan said this morning that he believed many of the company and people who left Hong Kong because of the quarantine measure will not likely return. And he also said that we need to wait and see if Hong Kong can maintain its status as a financial center. So what is your view about Chan's comment? And also, for the returning people, back to Hong Kong. So does the government have any plan to add more designated quarantine hotels on top of the current 43? So how can the government find more, and how many rooms does the government aim to have in total? Thank you.
Since my announcement on the 21st of March about lifting the place-specific flight suspension in respect of 9 countries, I did say on this occasion that there were 2 outstanding issues we need to tackle based on feedback given to us by the airlines, by the aviation industry, by people who have relatives stranded in those 9 countries. These 2 issues are, one is, yes, we could allow airlines to resume the inbound flights from these 9 countries by lifting the place-specific flight suspension regime. But at the same time, from the very beginning of fighting the epidemic, in order to prevent and reduce the importation of cases, there was always this other measure called the route-specific, flight-specific suspension. That is, if an inbound flight brought into Hong Kong a certain number of positive cases upon arrival. In other words, they boarded the plane with a negative PCR test, but then upon arrival, when they underwent the test and hold PCR test at the airport and was found to be positive. So that, of course, revealed that perhaps the rules have not been followed very stringently. I think we did have a case where one inbound flight brought in over 20 confirmed cases. So there is always this need to maintain this route-specific and flight-specific suspension measure. We have no plans to substantially reduce or relax the rule because this rule is needed in order to meet the fundamental objective of preventing the importation of cases, especially when a lot of countries and places have significantly relaxed many of the epidemic measures, including wearing masks and social distancing and vaccine pass and so on. So Hong Kong has to remain vigilant. So as far as this thing is concerned, the only thing is we are revisiting the various trigger thresholds to see whether there are sort of operational details that we could rationalize, but certainly not as described in the local media this morning as a major concession. I think the term used was 大讓步. We are not contemplating any major concession. As a matter of fact, this is an public health infection control measure. This is not a sort of a tug of war between the Hong Kong SAR government and individual airlines. Ultimately, we will act in the best interest of Hong Kong. The second issue that has been put to us is whether we have sufficient provision of designated quarantine hotels. For those who could get on a flight to come back, they need to produce proof of a pre-booked hotel for at least 7 nights. And prior to my announcement, I think we did not have the 43 hotels that you mentioned. We probably have about 25 designated quarantine hotels with about 6,000 rooms. And many of them were actually quite fully booked because other places could continue to come back. So I did promise again on this occasion that I will ask my colleagues to approach the hotels to see whether more of them could become a designated quarantine hotel. And on this front, we are making some good progress, and I believe the Food and Health Bureau will shortly announce that we are able to provide more designated quarantine hotels for those who could get on a flight and come back. So that's the about the issue of Hong Kong residents aspiring to come back. Now, I have not read the details of what Bernie Chan said. On what occasion he said, I don't even know. But I can tell you that although he is EXCO convener, he is expressing his personal views. Because there are so many people with so many views on this anti-epidemic issue, especially about the Hong Kong being an international city, whether we should open up more, whether we should be worried about the people leaving Hong Kong. The more authoritative stance could only come from me and the Hong Kong SAR government. So I would advise that you only treat Mr. Chan's views as his personal views, especially he comes from the financial sector. So certainly his view will be influenced by his colleagues and peers in the financial sector. But at the end of the day, as I said, our ultimate objective for Hong Kong is to suppress the fifth wave as soon as possible. And then we would aim to resume some travel into the mainland, and preferably also with overseas, so that business could resume and the economy could bounce back. Thank you.
好，下一位記者嘅提問。
Next question. Am I right? The one in the middle with the white mask, the lady. I'm from Now TV. First of all, I'd like to ask, for residents who were infected, in relation to the discharge criteria, Dr. Lan Jiqiu said that, well, they may take more time. 7 days is not enough. The situation may deteriorate. Well, there was a suggestion that they be sent to holding centers for a few more days. And just now, the secretary said that some of the care staff from the mainland have arrived in Hong Kong. Would you consider his suggestion? Would there be sufficient manpower to make it happen? I'd like to ask the chief executive. You said yesterday that in relation to vaccination rate in care homes for the elderly, is low, but vaccination itself may be controversial. There is press report saying that the government may amend the guidelines for those with cognitive problems and those with no family members. They can be vaccinated with the consent from a doctor. Do you really plan to do that? If that can be done, how much will the vaccination be boosted? Would you consider other ways to boost the vaccination rate? Lastly, I'd like to ask about the epidemic trend. In the past few days, it's about 10,000 cases or so. Yesterday, there was a poll that said that a quarter of the population plan to emigrate, and only half of the population are confident about our economic strength in the future. Well, given the decreasing trend of infection cases, do you have any measures to retain talent? Are there any plans to relax restrictions in relation to scheduled premises instead of asking them to wait till the 21st of April? There are 3 questions I will first answer before deferring to the secretary, particularly in relation to the first question, that is holding centers. The setting up of holding centers, as I've said, on one hand is to alleviate pressure on hospital beds of the HA, so that hospitals can focus their resources on treating COVID patients as well as serious cases. This is also to help care homes, particularly private ones, in dealing with pressure, so that they will be given the breathing space they need. Currently, there are 6 holding centers that are operating. We'll continue to set up more. Today, there is a report saying that we will put a stop to more centers. We don't have such a plan. In the past, other indoor sports centers being turned into holding centers, and in the Hung Shui Kiu community isolation centers, a part of them, about 200 beds or so, will be converted into holding center beds. So we still have the capacity. So in answer to your first question, we will make good use of these holding centers. Recovered patients, elderly ones, even if they can be discharged from hospitals, they will still be assessed by the hospital authority. And for the hospital authority as well as the social welfare department to make arrangements for them to go to stay in a holding center for further monitoring. Well, as mainland experts said, that for elderly patients, if they have contracted COVID, extra care has to be paid to them because their situation may deteriorate very rapidly. So we have distributed oximeter to elderly people. So we'll make good use of the holding centers. The second question is about vaccination. Well, when I replied to that question, I mentioned about a legal dispute. It's not the case that I would refrain from doing it because of that. It's just that I quoted the words used by the reporter. There may be litigations. Well, in relation to arranging elderly people to get vaccinated in the context of Hong Kong, there may be legal disputes. But it doesn't mean that if the government is of the view that more vigorous measures should be put in place to protect elderly people, we would hold back because of possible legal dispute. We may introduce relevant regulations for our work to go smoothly, as long as there is a need. If there are legal problems, then we will make use of the law to resolve it. In relation to vaccination rate in care homes, of course, the higher the better. We have conducted 2 rounds of outreach services to care homes for vaccination. We hope to boost it to 90%. For those in the community, we do hope that if you're aged above 70, then we hope that before the beginning of April, the vaccination rate can be increased to 90%. Of course, in other countries, they're already talking about the 4th jab for elderly people. So we should lose no time to boost the vaccination rate. We need to boost it by a large extent. In general, I'm not too keen to comment on opinion polls, so I'm not going to comment on it. I just ask you to remain confident. For the figures yesterday, whether they are PCR tests or RAT tests, the number is just over 10,000. We do hope that the figure announced today will be below 10,000, which will be a good trend. Starting from the 26th of March today to the 21st of April, there will be relaxation of social distancing measures by 3 phases. We still have a 4 weeks' time. We do hope that the declining trend will continue so that we can meet the premises before relaxation. That is, there is a decreasing trend and there is no rebound. Well, we don't plan to open anything or relax anything before the 21st of April because we don't think that within such a short time the situation and the number of cases will decrease to a satisfactory rate, and we will also have to keep up our work with vaccination.
CE, let me supplement. And please understand, this holding centers, the original aim, if you recall that the weather was cold back then and the A&E departments were very crowded with patients. When the hospital hoped that the recovered patients to return to the residential homes, and due to the outbreak and manpower shortage at the residential homes, this posed a challenge. Therefore, we created this holding centers. Well, when I first explained, and like the CE has said, our holding centers are now ready with the manpower arriving. Therefore, we will make some adjustment in order to make better use of these facilities to reduce the pressure on the hospitals and the residential homes. Therefore, we will arrange some of the residents when there's a confirmed case in a certain care home, and these confirmed cases, after the H8 outreach team assessment, they may not need to do it in person, and they could do through a remote consultation, but through the HA and DH and SWD joint assessment to see that if the resident is fit for the holding centers, then they will be sent directly to the holding centers from the homes instead of going to the A&D and undergo triage through HA before arriving at the holding centers. And this arrangement will be implemented in the coming week. If for the coming week there are no confirmed cases in the care homes, then this arrangement will not be invoked. Even though we now have around 10,000 cases, however, out there in the community there are lots of transmission chains. And a lot of our home staff, since they need to take care of their own families, they need to go home after work, therefore they may bring the virus to the care homes. Therefore, we try to minimize such risk, and whenever there's confirmed cases, and how do we reduce the pressure on the care homes, thus the holding centers can play such a role. Next question. On the back row. TVB News. Now that you hope there will be beds waiting for patients, and yet we're still having over 10,000 cases per day. If you're not able to have the patients fill the beds, then you still have the beds waiting for people. Some blame it as a poor coordination. What's your take on this? If there's sufficient facilities, will you abolish the requirement of in situ quarantine in residential homes? Currently, we do have sufficient isolation facilities, and we thank the central government by appointing a contractor that within a very short time, with the mainland support, they managed to construct these isolation facilities in such a short period. Before the start of the fifth wave, well, for the confirmed cases and the close contacts, we have a very stringent or complete public health arrangements. If you recall that all the confirmed cases, no matter symptomatic or not, they would be sent to the HA hospitals for isolation. That all the close contacts found through tracing, and even the sub-close contacts, were required to enter Penny Bay to be subject to 14 or 4 days of quarantine. With the arrival of the fifth wave, you might agree that this practice was unsustainable, with tens of thousands of cases each day and thousands of close contacts, and this approach cannot continue. Therefore, the public health policy must be adjusted to reality so that the public health authorities can protect the public health at the same time can carry on their work. From early February, we allowed the close contacts to quarantine at home. However, we still issued quarantine orders to them. Therefore, they could not leave home as required by the law. And we also provided home support for them. At the end of February, for the home quarantinees, we changed the guidelines. For the 6th or 7th RT negative test, they can finish their quarantine. We're facing a huge number of positive cases. A lot of the cases were asymptomatic, and they were required to enter quarantine facility, but there were very few of those and very resistant to the idea. A lot of the confirmed cases, and due to their home environment as more suitable, for example, having their own room, their own bathroom, and due to their own conditions, well, maybe they're asymptomatic or just slight fever or sore throat. Therefore, even with the quarantine facilities, well, there were a huge amount in coordination. Well, also in coordination between the government and the confirmed cases, we saw that it's more appropriate for them to quarantine and better to our overall effort, and yet the confirmed cases were very resistant. However, we could not let this stalemate to continue. Therefore, the CHP, and after the electronic assessment, deemed them suitable for home quarantine and allowed them to do so, providing home support for them. For example, sending the anti-epidemic kits to and offered telephone support, remote consultation, and they can get a priority list to the designated clinics. But how we developed the system, as we have more isolation facilities, does that mean that we can return to the previous practice? It's already happening. And for the H8, the modified guidelines has been tightened. Well, when you are discharged, you don't need to go home or to the residential homes. They can be sent to the holding centers for recuperation. We need to tweak from time to time in our execution. There is the public health consideration, our capacity, and the public reception. This work is ongoing, and I cannot simply dictate which measure is in place. Next question. On my right, Mingpao Daily News. Just now, it was mentioned some of the facilities would allow the elderly to be sent to the holding centers directly, and some of the holding centers can be reconverted as quarantine facilities. How many beds we're talking about? If some of the places are converted into quarantine centers, will it affect the current surplus? And in case of a rebound or another wave, and how quickly can these holding centers be retrofitted for the confirmed elderly cases? Secretary just now mentioned about the manpower. According to your update, that the holding centers and the residential homes, what is the manpower shortage? From the previous wave, we noticed that the care homes were hard hit. Some homes see the government as fully prepared, for example, have the facility in standby so that the residents will not be stranded. And as you said, the ventilation, this problem has been discussed previously. Before the start of the fifth wave, in terms of hardware, what preparations had the government made? And this wave, as so many residential homes reported cases, you mentioned about the shortcomings. And whose responsibility do you think it is? Since the LWB is in charge of the residential homes, do you think it should be held accountable?
Well, I can't supply you with the figures you asked for. Say, for example, how many beds will be turned into use as isolation or quarantine center. What we have planned is for centers that have not been put into actual operation. We're talking about 100 beds or so. If we're going to go ahead with the conversion, that will be the case. As to whether there is sufficient manpower to support the number of beds, there will be altogether about 2,700 beds or so. We don't have the manpower yet because we don't have that number of patients staying in these holding centers, but we have manpower coming in the pipeline, whether they're from Hong Kong or from the mainland. We'll make adjustments. And the rate of adjustments will take into account the arrival of the recruits. I believe that in the coming week, will make necessary adjustments. That includes allowing residents to go directly to holding centers, and if they are close contacts, they will be sent to other centers. I'm sure that arrangements will be made in the coming week. You asked about ventilation. If you recall, you may remember that in 2020, in the third outbreak, well, for the first two outbreaks, there were no care homes involved. Care homes were affected in the third outbreak. At that time, Professor Yuen Kok Yung visited care homes. The major consideration was ventilation. So starting from the third outbreak, we've been adding purifiers, air purifiers at care homes. For some care homes, if they have to meet the fresh air requirement, they may have to retrofit a number of things, and that itself will be a major renovation, and there is no way for them to relocate the residents. So addition of air purifiers as a supplementary tool is used. In the fifth wave, especially in face of the variant Omicron, there is a short distance air transmission. The standard put in place in 2000 would not be sufficient. That's why in the coming week, the Interdepartmental Working Group, led by my Permanent Secretary, will focus on the experience we have gathered, as well as the advice given by Professor Yuen. We hope work can start soon. We want to avoid certain things. We want to avoid the lesson, the tragic lesson we have learned in the fifth wave. We want to reduce risks involved in a crowded place. We don't rule out any possibilities. Our work includes helping care homes to install air conditioning systems and maybe large-scale retrofitting. So we may involve the EMSD. From the start of the epidemic till now, of course, the responsibility of caring for elderly people is on the Labor and Welfare Bureau. At the beginning, when the number of cases was low, we knew we needed to lose no time to enhance our facilities. But the rate of increase in the number of infections has overtaken our effort put in place. Yesterday, it was said that we've only procured one. With the rapid change of the epidemic, we could not catch up. So, with this heavy lesson learned, we hope to do better in terms of infection control. With the isolation center or as well as the holding centers in place, we hope that we won't see what happened in the past month or so to happen again.
藍色口
右手边蓝色口罩，有线新闻 and cable news, and there's been news that that there will be a relaxation of the circuit breaker mechanism for flights. Is that really the case? As Cathay Pacific claimed they can offer one flight for 14 days. Would relaxation create a loophole, and we no longer aim for dynamic zero cases? And so far you have 170,000 applications for the temporary unemployment relief scheme. What is the target number? And with the 300,000 and with below target, is the situation more severe? And which holding center will turn to accept close contacts? The government will pull the brakes on the Susai Wan holding center. In a short time, will you close the centers with low usage? 3 questions. For the first and the third question, will stem from speculative reports from the local media. Why I am meeting you every day so that I can timely clarify some misunderstanding or baseless, unsubstantiated reporting, so that they won't be going viral in this social media. For the first question, there is no major concession towards airlines. We're not currently dealing with a tug of war between the government and the airlines. We are talking about how do we protect Hong Kong and weather out this wave of the epidemic. We've been insisting on preventing importation cases and stopping the spread in the community to ensure to minimize the damage to Hong Kong. At the same time, after suppressing the epidemic, we can resume normal connectivity with the mainland and the overseas. And just because some airlines wish to add more flights, the government will abandon those principles and objectives as stated. For every measure subject to a reality and socio-economic needs, and they will be adjusted. And this Monday, and for the flight ban on 9 countries, there is room for rationalization. Therefore, we have announced new measures, and after announcement, we receive some feedback. Then, in order to let the people stranded in 9 countries returning to Hong Kong, the government may need to consider 2 relevant questions. First, on the circuit breaker on certain routes or flights for any potential room for rationalization. And 2, they need to make a 7 days hotel reservation before boarding a flight and whether there are adequate hotel rooms. As I said, the departments are looking into this. And for the second issue, we are making progress. We are able to identify more hotels for quarantine. Well, at the peak, we have had more than 6,000 rooms, actually over 10,000. However, due to less inbound passengers and due to the flight ban on 9 countries and due to other operation needs, for example, we have leased some hotels for quarantine and some handed over to LWB for closed loop management for care home staff. Therefore, we are adjusting internally to free up more hotel rooms for quarantine hotels so that the Hong Kong residents wishing to return home can book the reservations easier. However, the first measure is still very important in preventing the import cases, and therefore there's no room for relaxation or so-called major concession. The other question was speculative and claimed that we will put the brakes on other testing centers. We have pointed out that there's no such plans, that all the holding centers in construction, even though you claim that they are low in usage, we will make good use of them so that the elderly can spend more time under medical surveillance to recuperate, and also to reduce the pressure on hospital beds and allow some room for respite for the residential home operators. For the holding centers about to be completed, I think works are still underway, including the recruiting enough carers. And for the temporary unemployment relief scheme, that since its launch, we received very good response. According to Ms. Ho, we received over 170,000 applications. And this is one of the major initiatives under the Anti-Epidemic Fund. We expected 300,000 applications, therefore we allocated 3 billion. After hearing the feedbacks, for the applications, we tend to like a relaxed approach. For example, we allowed gig work and other circumstances. And if the applications exceeded the 300,000 number, we will approve them as well. Well, for the 300,000 applications or 3 billion funding, it's not a hard ceiling. So long you're eligible, we try to be accommodating as possible, and we try to approve as many as possible to support the temporary unemployed. That's the end of the press conferences, and we'll see you tomorrow at 11.